This video explores trending online allegations, circulating rumors, and public reactions, strictly for analysis and commentary. None of the information presented should be taken as confirmed fact.
Because she's a black woman, or at least I thought she was. She clearly has black children. So are you saying you don't mind your children growing up in a society where they can...
Something just fractured in the heart of hip-hop. And this time, it wasn't a leaked text, a surprise arrest, or a diss record dropping in the dead of night. No, this was something far worse. A betrayal that scorched everything it touched. When Cardi B finally broke her silence, she didn't tiptoe. She set fire to the room. This isn't politics. Not anymore. This is about trust shattered, about identity ripped apart, about a woman once idolized by millions now standing in stark opposition to everything she built her kingdom on. Nicki Minaj, the same force who once warned fans against Trump, who rose on black culture, who thrived because of a fiercely loyal LGBTQ+ following, now claims the title of Trump's ultimate supporter. And Cardi B dared to ask the question no one else had the courage to voice. Who is she now? Cardi doesn't see growth. She doesn't see evolution. She sees a deliberate, calculated betrayal. And the fallout? It's messy. Beneath the glitter, beneath the wigs, beneath the platinum plaques, there's a shadow world. Legal threats, family scandals, influence slipping, power being hunted. Cardi didn't just highlight the MAGA pivot. She traced every move with receipts. From Nicki's impassioned anti-Trump warnings to her sudden adoration. From preaching loyalty to her community to abandoning the very people who once made her untouchable. And when she amplified D.L. Hughley's scorching critique, it landed like a hammer. Maybe Nicki should have fixed her own chaos before chasing political applause while vultures circled her family. And then the theory no one wanted to speak aloud. Even Cardi couldn't ignore it. What if this isn't belief? What if this is manipulation? What if Nicki Minaj isn't the mastermind but the pawn? The internet erupted. Fandoms fractured. Cultural loyalties splintered. And the question that refuses to die now dominates every conversation. Did Nicki Minaj sell her legacy? Or was she forced into a role with no exit? Because one truth is undeniable. This wasn't a mere change of heart. This was a line crossed, a threshold broken, and the culture is now watching her every move, waiting for the next shock.
Hello guys, I'm with my favorite president, the best president of all time.
The moment Cardi B finally spoke, the entire culture froze. Not because she screamed, not because she insulted, but because she said aloud what everyone else had been too afraid to whisper. This wasn't merely politics anymore. This felt personal. For years, Nicki Minaj had built herself as untouchable, not just musically, but culturally. Her persona was forged in defiance, as the outsider who clawed her way to the top. She wasn't just a rapper. She was a symbol for women, for Black audiences, for LGBTQ+ fans who saw her as a champion, a protector, a voice that mattered when it counted. And then something shifted. Cardi B didn't frame Nicki's change as evolution. She didn't call it growth or maturity. She asked a question that cut sharper than any diss track. How do you go from warning your fans about Trump to proudly naming him your favorite president? That question detonated the scene. Because when people actually went back and checked, the receipts were undeniable. Nicki had publicly criticized Trump's immigration policies. She had spoken with raw emotion about children being torn from their parents. She had mocked every celebrity who jumped on his bandwagon, insisting that she would never join. And yet here she was, smiling, praising, declaring loyalty. Cardi B didn't have to shout. The contrast spoke louder than any words. What made it even more jarring was who her audience had always been. Nicki Minaj's empire didn't rise in isolation. It was powered by a community that defended her endlessly, especially the LGBTQ+ fans who stood by her when the industry turned its back. Fans who showed up to every tour, promoted every record, shielded her from scandal after scandal. And now, many of those same fans felt betrayed. Cardi B spelled it out. This wasn't just hypocrisy. This was betrayal. And once that word entered the narrative, everything escalated because betrayal carries intent. As the debate intensified, another, darker layer emerged. Cardi B didn't shy away. Nicki's MAGA alignment wasn't happening in a vacuum. It came at a time when her public image was already under siege. Legal headlines shadowed her family. They hadn't disappeared. They lingered, quietly, constantly. That's when Cardi struck at the heart of the contradiction. Why the sudden obsession with politics when your own house is burning? It wasn't framed as an accusation. It was framed as a question of priorities. And that question didn't fade. As the backlash grew, the tone around Nicki Minaj began to shift. Not anger, not fury, something colder, something heavier. A disappointment that doesn't trend on Twitter, but cuts far deeper. The shift became undeniable when even voices who once championed her now sounded exhausted.
You know, we love her music. I've spoken to her several times. You know, collectively, I feel like we were a little bit disappointed with her, but I feel like she needs to spend a lot of time with Mr. Bruce Springsteen. She needs to go sit on his lap and let him speak some words of wisdom to her heart. Because yes.
This wasn't an attack. It was far worse. Disappointment carries weight. It carries expectation. It carries belief. When someone tells you you're off course, they're saying you were meant to go somewhere else entirely. That's why this moment cut so deep. Even critics weren't denying Nicki Minaj's talent. They weren't trying to erase her legacy. They were questioning her direction. And direction is everything. As whispers grew louder, a theory began to circulate, a theory Cardi B didn't shy away from confronting. It was uncomfortable. It was raw. It wasn't flattering, and it wasn't simple. What if Nicki Minaj isn't leading this movement, but being positioned? Political movements don't just chase voters, they hunt for symbols. And when certain figures fall out of favor, replacements are chosen. Louder, bigger, faces with global reach. In that light, Nicki's sudden rise in MAGA spaces didn't feel accidental. It felt strategic. This is where Cardi B's critique pierced the surface. She didn't claim Nicki believed in Trump's ideology. She didn't deny it either. She asked the question that made the room shiver. Is this belief, or is this business? History has a pattern. When relevance fades, controversy becomes currency. And nothing sparks attention faster than a dramatic pivot. The reaction was instant. Social media exploded. Fan bases fractured. Some leapt to defend Nicki Minaj, framing her decision as freedom of thought. Others refused to accept it. They recognized the pattern, a recurring story in the music world. Artists pivoting politically when mainstream support wanes, finding new audiences that reward outrage more than artistry. And once that suspicion settles in, it's almost impossible to reverse. As more voices joined the debate, the disappointment hardened into something sharper. Not just a question of politics. Not just ideology. Legacy. Influence. How this chapter would be remembered. And then that same disappointed voice returned, this time louder, colder, sharper. That word again, off track. Not evil. Not cancelled. Not lost. Not with answers. Just fractured. Because if Nicki Minaj truly believes every word she says, then the culture must face a harsh, uncomfortable truth. Division is real, and it cuts deep. But if this is strategy, if this is alignment for protection, attention, or profit, then the betrayal cuts even deeper, sharper, irreparable. And Cardi B's message? It became unavoidable. Influence is built on community. Turn your back on that community, and it's not just a pivot. It's a reckoning. By the time disappointment hardened into outrage, the conversation around Nicki Minaj was no longer abstract. It wasn't about ideology. It wasn't even about music anymore. It became about accountability. As Cardi B pressed the issue further, a darker tone swept through the timeline, one that didn't sound disappointed, didn't sound confused, didn't even sound betrayed. It sounded angry. Because for many critics, Nicki's sudden MAGA alignment didn't feel like a surprise. It felt calculated. And once people start believing something is calculated, the questions get sharper. Harder. Questions about motive. Questions about timing. Questions about what someone might be trying to outrun or outmaneuver. Cardi B didn't accuse. She amplified. And what she amplified was impossible to ignore. Nicki's pivot wasn't happening in a vacuum. It happened while uncomfortable headlines lingered, while scrutiny around her inner circle refused to fade, while her public image, once untouchable, bulletproof, showed the first cracks. That's when the language shifted. Critics stopped saying, "This feels wrong." They began saying, "This feels deliberate." The backlash escalated, from social media threads to microphones, from tweets to podcasts. And unlike disappointed fans, these voices didn't soften. They didn't hesitate. They went straight for the jugular. This wasn't critique. It was rejection. And while the words were sharp, the emotion behind them spread like wildfire, a belief that Nicki Minaj had crossed a moral line she could never walk back. For years, her defenders insisted controversy had chased her unfairly, that she was misunderstood, targeted, singled out. But this time it felt different. This time, the anger wasn't coming from outside the culture. It was coming from within. The LGBTQ+ angle poured gasoline on the flames. Fans who had built parts of their identity around Nicki's music felt blindsided. Many admitted they didn't recognize her anymore, not because of who she supported, but because of how she spoke, who she aligned with, and what she seemed willing to dismiss. Cardi B exposed that fracture without dramatization. You can't build an empire on loyalty and community and then act shocked when that very foundation demands consistency. As the backlash intensified, the story around Nicki's MAGA alignment began twisting again. No longer framed as mere belief or clever strategy, it started looking like deflection. Why politics? Why now? Critics began whispering a darker theory. Perhaps the controversy wasn't accidental. Perhaps it was designed, a calculated distraction, a way to redirect attention, shift the conversation, drown out questions she didn't want asked. Cardi B didn't declare it fact. She didn't need to. She let the whispers speak for themselves. And then, one voice returned, sharp, unmistakable, slicing through celebrity protection like a scalpel. A voice known for exposing truths no one else dares touch. The room changed the moment the truth landed. This wasn't about politics. Not really. This was about priorities. D.L. Hughley didn't sugarcoat it. His words were brutal, sharp, unavoidable. And they landed because they echoed what everyone had been thinking but dared not say aloud. When your personal life is under a microscope, aligning with power sometimes looks less like belief and more like armor. This wasn't proof. It was perspective. But perspective matters, especially when it comes from someone who's watched Hollywood protect, deflect, and rebrand itself for decades. Cardi B didn't repeat the claim. She didn't add more details. She didn't escalate. She did something far smarter. She let the quote breathe in public record and let the audience draw their own conclusions. And those conclusions came fast. Fans began asking, was Nicki Minaj's MAGA phase about safety? About protection? About proximity to institutions that reward loyalty and shield from scrutiny? Some pushed back, accusing critics of conspiracy thinking, claiming it was unfair targeting. They argued Nicki had a right to her beliefs and should not be punished for political alignment. But even those defenses couldn't erase the central contradiction Cardi kept spotlighting. This isn't who Nicki Minaj said she was. And that contradiction kept the fire alive. As clips circulated, reactions intensified. Some fans walked away quietly. Others burned bridges publicly. Comment sections became battlefields. The culture split, not along party lines, but along trust lines. Who do you believe when an icon flips? The version you loved or the version standing in front of you now? What started as a political controversy evolved into something heavier, a question of integrity, of whether influence carries responsibility, of whether fame shields you from accountability. Cardi B didn't declare victory. She didn't call for cancellation. She framed a reckoning. And as the chaos reached its fever pitch, one unsettling truth became clear. This wasn't the end of backlash. It was the beginning of consequences. Because when public figures trade credibility for alignment, the cost is rarely instant, but it is always real. By the time the outrage peaked, the conversation around Nicki Minaj had moved past emotion. This wasn't disappointment. This wasn't backlash. This was about use. As the noise settled, a quieter, darker question took over. Who benefits from this switch? And more importantly, why now? The chatter stopped feeling like gossip. It started feeling calculated. Political movements don't just recruit voters, they recruit symbols, faces with reach, names that carry cultural weight. When one symbol becomes inconvenient, another is elevated to take its place. This was the lens many observers began using to decode what they were witnessing. Not a spontaneous belief shift, not a moral awakening, but a strategic alignment, one bigger than Nicki herself. Cardi B didn't call it a conspiracy. She called it a pattern. History shows that when high-profile Black conservative voices fall out of favor with the mainstream right, a vacuum opens. And vacuums? They never stay empty. They are filled swiftly by someone louder, more famous, more polarizing. In that context, Nicki's sudden MAGA embrace didn't seem random. It felt timed. The optics were impossible to ignore. Public praise. Conservative platforms amplifying her voice. Viral moments engineered for maximum attention. Every appearance reinforced the narrative. Nicki Minaj as evidence that even icons could cross over, that culture itself was shifting. But here's the chilling part. Symbols don't need belief. They just need visibility. And that's the line Cardi B kept circling, never accusing Nicki of lying, but questioning whether belief even mattered in this game. As the theory spread, it drew in voices who study power, not personalities. People who analyze how movements position individuals to distract, redirect, and legitimize agendas. And in that chaos, one voice cut through. Not with insults, not with drama, but with structure. This wasn't presented as fact. It was presented as theory. But theories gain power when they reveal what raw facts alone cannot. Dr. Umar wasn't claiming that Nicki Minaj orchestrated this. He wasn't saying she masterminded a political pivot. He was suggesting something colder, more calculated. That Nicki's fame made her useful, and usefulness doesn't require belief. That alone reframed everything. If Nicki was being positioned as a symbol, then her past statements didn't matter. Her contradictions didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was what her image could achieve right now. Distraction, legitimization, noise. Cardi B didn't endorse the theory. She didn't validate it. She simply acknowledged it, because whether it was true or not, the impact had already struck. The culture fractured. Conversations derailed. Attention shifted. And in the world of politics, attention is currency. What made this theory stick wasn't ideology, it was consistency. The pattern had repeated before. Loud figures elevated suddenly. Platforms offered without scrutiny. Criticism reframed as persecution. In that scenario, belief becomes irrelevant. Performance becomes everything. Which brings us to the central unease. Does Nicki Minaj truly believe what she says? Or is belief irrelevant? Cardi B asked the question not as an attack, but as a warning about how power operates. Once someone becomes a symbol, control over their story slips away. They are defended when convenient, discarded when they are not. History is littered with those examples. As the debate matured, some fans began to see things differently. Not as Nicki betraying the culture, but as Nicki stepping into a role that would inevitably cost her credibility. Others rejected the theory outright, arguing it stripped her of agency, reducing her to a pawn. But even that defense raised another question. If this isn't strategy, then what is it? Money? Protection? Relevance? And no answer comes without consequence. By now, the culture wasn't asking whether Nicki had the right to her beliefs. That question had passed. The new question, does influence come with responsibility? And if that responsibility is abandoned, does it leave a permanent mark? Because legacy isn't measured by chart positions, It's measured by trust. And trust, once fractured, does not heal quietly. As this chapter closes, the conversation returns to where Cardi B started, not with certainty, but with accountability. Not with verdicts, but with implications. If Nicki Minaj believes every word she says, the culture must reckon with the reality of division. If she doesn't, the cost of being used may be far higher than she realizes. Either way, the result is the same. A line has been crossed. A symbol has shifted. And the culture is watching every move. Because when icons trade consistency for alignment, the fallout doesn't stop at backlash. It ends in redefinition. And history will decide, was this conviction or a role that demanded too much? This is where the story stops being entertaining and starts becoming tragic. Once the noise fades, what remains isn't politics, it's loss. Loss of trust. Loss of alignment. Loss of a connection built over years and shattered in seconds. When an artist grows bigger than their music, every move carries weight. And when that weight shifts, it doesn't fall quietly, it crashes. This isn't about canceling anyone. It's about consequences. About how loyalty can turn to disbelief overnight when words no longer match history. For fans who defended every controversy, who showed up when the industry turned cold,